and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime with Liverpool back in Champions League action on Wednesday night. Things are going perfectly so far in the Premier League, certainly in terms of results. However, in the Champions League, things are slightly more hairy for Liverpool. I don't think anyone's calling it, a problem situation just yet. Everything's going relatively smoothly, but obviously we did kick things off with a poor defeat against Napoli away from home in the first match day. And I think what's really, really important for Liverpool now is we get back on track with this game against Red Bull Salzburg, or RB Salzburg, or just Salzburg, whatever you want to call them. We'll be playing them at Anfield on Wednesday night, the second match of the group stage campaign, and our first one back at home, back at Anfield. The first time we get to essentially stride out as European champions. The first time the home crowd will get to see us defending our title on the European stage. And I just think it's important, to just get back to winning ways, and also I think to put in a very, very solid performance, because while I said everything was going perfect in the league, I think performance-wise it's been slightly mixed over the last couple of weeks. I thought Chelsea, we got lucky in a few stages. We definitely got lucky in the game against Sheffield United. I think that was potentially Liverpool's poorest performance of the season, possibly tied with the one against Napoli, but I think there were still, positive signs in that game as well. So I think it's really, really important that we just get back to winning ways and also put on a real show. And I also think when you take a look at Red Bull Salzburg, they are kind of the dark horses for this group. I'll come on to them in a lot more detail later on in the video, but they certainly don't look like the kind of pot 3, pot 4 fodder that I think we initially had them down as. They're top of their league. They played well in the first game, pardon me. And they've got a real wonder kid up front for them. So they could end up putting a little bit of pressure on Liverpool and Napoli, who I think everyone kind of has down as the default teams that are almost definitely going to qualify from this group. And I think if we just put a little bit of distance between them and us, so it doesn't really become any sort of problem, then that would obviously do us a huge favour. And it will then just sort of become about whether or not we can finish above Napoli, which is also another reason why I think we do need to win this game, because they've already opened up a 3-point lead on us. And we know in the Champions League just how important finishing first in your group can be when you get into the knockout stages. So there's plenty for Liverpool to play for here. I think on any other night, you'd maybe look at this and think it would be a relatively routine win, but I think there's just a lot of factors that come into play that make this game a lot more fascinating than I think it normally would be. So team news going into the game. Jurgen Klopp did his press conference this afternoon, and we've got a little bit of injury news. Joel Matip sustained a knock in the game against Sheffield United and will not be available for this game. The way Klopp spoke about it in the fact he just ruled Matip out of this game makes me feel like it's probably not going to be too bad. Obviously the language being used as well, it's a knock, it's not a heavy injury or anything like that, so it feels more precautionary than anything to do with a muscle injury or something that's going to keep him out and he's going to have to go through any sort of rehabilitation program. So fingers crossed he will be available for the game against Leicester at the weekend, but if not, we've then obviously got the international break, which should give him plenty of time to recover before that massive game at Old Trafford on the 19th or the 20th, one of those days later on in October. So Joel Matip will be unavailable for this game. Xherdan Shaqiri is still not available for us, which is a real shame, because I think this was definitely the run of the games where we felt like he was going to get a few more minutes in a Liverpool shirt. Obviously it hasn't really got going for him yet so far this season. I think this is yet another game, these kind of European matches at home against lesser opposition. He thrived in these kind of situations last season. I think back to that match against Red Star Belgrade where we won 4-0 at Anfield, and he was probably Liverpool's star player in that match. It was the first time we'd switched up to using the 4-2-3-1 formation, with him accommodated into that, playing on the right hand side of the advanced midfielders, and he played very, very well. He linked up fantastically, and it kind of started that 2-month or so run where Xherdan Shaqiri wasn't just a useful player for Liverpool, but actually became absolutely vital for us in certain games. So I'm really disappointed he's not available, because I had this game down along with MK Dons last weekend as one where we would see Xherdan Shaqiri either from the start or in some kind of sub role where he'd play more than his usual kind of role of coming on for the last 5 minutes and just running around for a bit. So Xherdan Shaqiri is still unavailable. Alisson, Jurgen Klopp gave a very positive update on. He seems incredibly happy with how he's progressed and said that he's getting very, very close now, but this game still definitely comes too soon. I think looking at how that's going to pan out, I feel like there's no point risking him for the game against Leicester at the weekend, especially with the form that Adrian San Miguel has been in. So I think Alisson not available for this game or for the one against Leicester, but I think he's another one one that you definitely target for a comeback in the game against Manchester United. So as for how I think Liverpool are going to line up, it is going to be Adrian in goal. An absolutely fantastic performance from him in his Champions League debut last time out against Napoli, and I'm still gutted for the lad that he came away from it with nothing, because he made a great save. He was so close to getting to that penalty as well, and I feel like this is a real chance for him to prove that he is more than good enough to play for Liverpool, or at least back Liverpool up in these Champions League games. And so, you know, what's great about Adrian is when I say that at the top of these videos, I don't have to say sort of Adrian San Miguel, oh, are the opposition going to target him? I can now just say Adrian is fine. He's good enough. He's actually, no, he's more than good enough. He's pretty great, let's be honest. He's been great in the Liverpool shirt, deserves more clean sheets than he's come away with, and I'm just hoping for another great performance from him. So yeah, Adrian's going to be starting in goal. Moving on to the centre-backs, obviously Virgil van Dijk is going to play, especially with Joel Matip out. The last thing you want to do is drop both of your first-choice centre-backs. But alongside Virgil van Dijk, I think this time will be Joe Gomez joining him. Someone who we know is brilliant, who formed such a formidable partnership with Van Dijk in the first few months of last season, and it was such a shame to see him get injured. But since then, Joel Matip has come in and deputised. He has been phenomenal, and it would be so cruel on Matip to bomb him out the side for Joe Gomez, even though we know not only is Gomez great, but him and Van Dijk had a great understanding in those early stages of last season. So what's great about that is that even though it's not great for Joe Gomez because he's not getting the minutes that, let's be honest, he kind of deserves, it does mean that when Joel Matip goes out injured, we have got more than a decent enough replacement in Joe Gomez, who is fantastic and will almost definitely be starting this game alongside Virgil van Dijk. And I, for one, I'm excited to see how he gets on, because he was fine against MK Dons, but you've got to take into account the fact that was obviously against lesser opposition, and also the fact he was partnering Dejan Lovren, which is a partnership you feel like we're probably not going to see that much of this season outside of the domestic cup competition. So Gomez and Van Dijk are your centre-back pairing. The full-backs, I think, then have got to be Trent Alexander-Arnold on the right-hand side. We don't really have any room for manoeuvre there with Joe Gomez playing at centre-back. And then I think, again, you just go with the obvious option of Andrew Robertson at the left-back. And then moving on to the midfield, I think we might see a little bit of a shake-up here, because I think it's fair to say that the midfield against Sheffield United was a wee bit stagnant, although obviously that's kind of a null and void criticism, because as we all know, a lot of Liverpool's creativity comes from the fullbacks and not the midfield, and the midfield is expected to do a lot more of like the engine room dirty work and do some almost more defensive work than the fullbacks actually do themselves. Obviously the problem against Sheffield United was our fullbacks were completely nullified for various stages of the game, and that is where you suddenly feel like there's a lot more pressure on the midfield and this lack of creativity becomes exposed. But obviously it's a lack of creativity that's almost deliberate, because as we know, it's coming from somewhere else. But I feel like for this game, Jurgen Klopp may just look to change things around a little bit, possibly also just, you know, for the sake of rotation. We've got so many fantastic midfielders at the club, and it would feel silly to neglect some of them, even though we have kind of got the preferred system of Fabinho playing deep and then Henderson and Wijnaldum ahead of him. I don't think we're going to see a complete change around. I don't think we're going to see anything like the midfield we had against MK Dons. I think it's more likely to be Fabinho still playing at the base, because he is just so trustworthy and so important to this side now, and he's incredibly consistent as well. He very rarely ever has a bad game in Liverpool shirt, so I think he has to start in the number 6 role. I think Jordan Henderson keeps his place as the captain, you know, just a great footballer really. What more else can you say about him? Again, some people criticised him for not being too creative against Sheffield United, but we've already been over that, so I won't talk about it anymore. And then I think the other midfield spot will probably or potentially go to Oxlade-Chamberlain. Like I said, I think there's going to be some rotation. I doubt we'll see more than one change, but I think what rotation we do see will be in an attacking sense. Originally, I thought we might see Naby Keita here. Obviously, he's against his former team. A European match, so you feel like even if he's not quite adjusted to the pace and the physicality of the Premier League, this therefore suits him better. And being at home as well, he'll probably have a bit more freedom to attack, and he won't be asked to do too much defensively. But Jurgen Klopp has said that the club are being very careful in terms of how they manage Naby Keita's return from injury. They're not going to rush him back. They're not just going to chuck him straight back into starting 11s week in, week out, just because he's now fit enough to play football for the first team. So, you know, I'd love to see Keita, and maybe we see him from the bench. If Jurgen Klopp gets to go ahead from the medical team, then maybe we actually do see him from the start. But I think also Oxlade-Chamberlain deserves a hell of a lot of minutes, and he's still a very good option for Liverpool as well. So I think Oxlade-Chamberlain completes the midfield. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was still Wijnaldum, or if Henderson got taken out for Ox, or if James Milner was put in there. As I said, we've got some fantastic midfield options, and I feel like Jurgen Klopp may look at this game in a sort of horses for courses approach and just try and pick the players that really suit the situation. And for me, I feel like that means we'll need one extra slightly more creative player in the centre of the park. And then the attack, is obvious, really. Divock Origi obviously made a fantastic cameo against Sheffield United, and I think definitely deserves more football, even though he has kind of, cemented his role as the super sub for Liverpool. He does so well in terms of coming on and being able to play multiple roles, and also being able to immediately insert himself into the rhythm of the match, even though you'd argue that he maybe doesn't have the same sharpness as the other players. So I think Origi, once again, will probably be used more as a super sub, although again, I would not be surprised if maybe we even went for something like the 4-2-3-1 that we ended the match with against Sheffield United. But I think from the start, it's more likely that we keep the 4-3-3 and we keep the system that works best, and that is Mane on the left, Salah on the right, and Roberto Firmino down the centre. Right, so taking a little look at RB Salzburg then, obviously, as I said at the top of the video, they were kind of seen as one of the whipping boys of the group, but as we all know from last season and the Red Star Belgrade debacle, nothing is really as it seems in the Champions League, and at the end of the day, pretty much every team that's involved is one of the best teams in their respective leagues, so they're not used to losing, they're used to dominating matches, they all have that winning mentality, and they know how to deal with adversity, because you don't win leagues without those kind of attributes. So they are obviously a very, very good side. They proved that in their first game of the Champions League campaign as well. They are currently the ones who are topping the group with a +4 goal difference and 3 points after utterly smashing Genk by 6 goals to 2. They've also scored 40 goals so far in their league campaign, which equals around 4.5 goals per game, which is a ridiculous return. Obviously, you can say, oh, it's the Austrian league and Liverpool's defence is obviously going to be way better than any of the defences that are in the Austrian league. But as I said, like, these teams, they have that in their mentality. They know how to attack, they know how to score goals, and they've got the confidence to do it, and they've shown they can do it on the European stage as well. I'm sure you've all heard about as I said, the wonder kid they've got up top, Erling Haaland, son of Alf Inge Haaland, who is just tearing it up at the moment. He got a hat-trick on his first ever Champions League appearance in that game against Genk. I'm pretty sure he got it in the first 45 minutes as well, and he's just been tearing it up. I think he scored something like 17 goals in his first 10 games so far this season. He may have slightly gone off the boil since then, because that's the only stat I've heard around him, so fingers crossed that things have slightly calmed down, which would obviously be good news for Liverpool. The last thing we need is someone who literally just scores a hat-trick at Anfield, because that obviously drastically reduces our chances of winning the game, although I would still back us to score goals, because one thing that I have noticed in all these fantastic results they've been getting is they don't seem to keep too many clean sheets either. Obviously, they conceded 2 against Genk. It was mentioned that they played Celtic in the Europa League last season, and they won that, and they won 2-1 at Celtic, and then they won 3-1 at home, so they didn't keep clean sheets in that either. Their only non-win of the season so far in the league has been a 2-2 draw, so again conceding 2 goals, although albeit they went 2-0 down and then came back to draw 2-2, and that was without Erling Haaland as well. So they're clearly a fantastic team who've got depth, but it does look like they've got a soft underbelly there in terms of their defence. In terms of the way they attack in general, they are very dynamic. They love to press as well. Their manager said that, what's annoying about playing Liverpool, is that everything they do brilliantly, Liverpool do better. So I get the feeling this match is it could be 2 teams just cancelling each other out with their similar styles of play, and it ends up just being that hopefully Liverpool's quality shines through and we win 2-0 or 3-1 or something like that. Or, and this is kind of almost what I'm hoping for, because I feel like it's now been hyped up as this clash of not titans, but 2 teams with very similar styles, the old masters versus the young pretenders in terms of that attacking, counter-attacking, pressing style. And I feel like it could almost go the way of that game Borussia Dortmund had. I think it was against Legia Warszawa, where they won 8-4. It was like the highest scoring Champions League group game in history, and it was just absurd. And I feel like we could somehow end up with a game like that on the books on Wednesday night, just because of the way both teams play. And obviously RB Salzburg have said how, because they've tried so hard to get into the Champions League and haven't done it yet, and this is the first time they've reached the Premier European competition, they're playing without fear at the moment, because they haven't got any disappointment hanging over them. They haven't got matches to look back on and say, well, we played brilliantly but we lost that one, so we need to be more pragmatic. They're literally just coming in thinking, well, we've got this style and it works and it's fun and we know how to implement it, and so they're just going to do that regardless of what opposition they play against. And we often feel like that plays into Liverpool's hands. You know, a team, when they like come to Anfield and say, oh, we're not going to sit back and park the bus, we're going to take the game to them. Often when we see that, teams end up 4-0 down within the first 45 minutes. You know, the first, or at least most recent one that springs to mind is the game against Norwich at the start of the season, where they were like, well, we're not going to sacrifice our attacking style for the Premier League. They came to Anfield and got ripped to bits and were 4-0 down inside 40 minutes. So fingers crossed for something like that on Wednesday night. But I think that the way they play and the enthusiasm with which they do it, and the fact they have started the season so well, and they've clearly got strength in depth as well as a fantastic player in Erling Haaland up front. These are just all these variables, and of course the fact that it does feel like, even though you normally look at this game and think, well, yeah, you know, we'll probably win it, it suddenly feels like a must-win game because of the Napoli result, and probably because of the slightly disappointing performance, if not result, against Sheffield United, and also, you know, the fact that we have just got to get back on track in the Champions League. It suddenly feels like there is a bit more pressure on, and it is more of a must-win game for Liverpool now, although of course that is ridiculous in a sense, because as we all know, we got to the Champions League knockout stages and won the competition with 9 points from the group stage. So you feel like maybe it will be a little bit over the top to say that this is already a huge game for Liverpool and the pressure is already on, but it does feel like there are plenty of variables that make this game a lot more interesting than it may initially appear on the surface. Although as it stands, I still think Liverpool are going to come away with the win. I think we'll probably get it by a couple of goals, although I doubt we're going to keep a clean sheet. If I had to put some money on a result, I'd say 4-2. Let's go with 4-2. Obviously, Gomez coming back in, he's great, but that does slightly unsettle the back line in a way. It does switch things around a little bit. He obviously hasn't played any football, I think, with Adrian San Miguel yet, so that might become a factor as well. So I think we will probably concede at least one goal, but I definitely back us to score plenty at the other end. So a win for Liverpool, and like I said, if I had to put money on a score, it'd be 4-2. Let me know your score predictions down in the comments below. Apart from that, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, as always, you guys know what to do. Hit the like button down there, hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days, and don't forget to follow at @EliciFocusTV on Twitter. I'll be back tomorrow night with a post-match reaction after we've hopefully beaten Red Bull Salzburg. Until then, bye for now.